As you please. Whatever you saw, you've already seen all the news.
Hi, everybody. I just sent a link to YouTube in the chat, and I'm going to ask if you don't mind about, let's get 10, 15 people just to go watch on YouTube. It's the exact same thing. You'll just see it through YouTube instead of Zoom. So leave this group. Okay. Now I'm hearing myself. 1 second. Yeah, I hope this is not a problem for, okay, so a few people can get off and just, copy that link, go to that link, and then Rabbi Marcus will be able to get on to to our group here, okay? So I'm counting on a bunch of people. Please go to the link that I just sent right here. I'm gonna put it into the chat again. Okay, copy that link into your browser and leave the Zoom group, and you'll be able to see.
I can't get on to YouTube.
Okay. Okay, a few more people can please, yeah. Okay, copy that link, copy the link, take into your browser, and you can watch it on YouTube Live. It should work. Okay, Rav Daron is Rabbi Marcus in?
Yeah, I just asked him to join. So it's on YouTube Live. That's where I should be directing people.
Yeah.
Let's check that he's joining us. Went up to 100 again.
Okay. I'm gonna ask about 10, 15 people. If you're not sure if you should do it, you should do it. Take the link, copy the link that I just sent in from YouTube. Go to that link and remove yourself from the Zoom group. And this way we can get other people, Rabbi Marcus in particular, who we're interviewing, to be able to get onto the Zoom. Please follow this link, and we need about another 10, 15 people to leave the group and watch on YouTube instead of watching on Zoom. Okay, it's the exact same thing. This will enable Rabbi Marcus to sign on. Is he here? Rabbi Marcus, are you here by any chance? I see Rabbi Marcus, he is here, okay. I'm going to add spotlight. Okay, good. I think we are, I'll send the link one more time, Evelyn. Okay, number four is the charm, right? Okay, let me just also, okay, 1 second. Good. Okay, are we good? Can everybody see and everybody hear? Just thumbs up if you could hear and you could see. And okay, fantastic. We're gonna get this show on the road. I want to first of all welcome everybody to, let me put on the recorder before I forget. So Erev Tov L'Kulam. It's great to see you all. What an unbelievable group we have here. We have over 130 people watching at this point live, and this is very exciting. I want to welcome everybody to Kehilat Shiftei Yisrael's Zoom platform, Erev Tov L'Kulam. I want to just, want to let everybody know that on a regular basis on Sunday nights, we do many cultural events. And this is part of our series we've been having going on for another number of months now. I want to thank Andy Allen, the chairman of Shift Day. He's here. So let's thank Andy for helping to organize this. Thank you, Andy. And let's get the show on the road. We have two very distinguished guests that I want to introduce everybody to, although I reckon that everybody here knows our distinguished guests very well. So I'll first introduce myself. My name is Rabbi. I'm privileged to serve as the Rabbi of Kilat Shiftei Yisrael in Ra'anana. And we have Rav Doron Klein, who many of you recognize, the CEO of Telfed. Telfed helps Jews from Australia, South Africa, make Aliyah, settle in Eretz Yisrael. They're fully engaged in Mitzvat Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And our Shift Day and Telfed are our sister organizations. So Rav Doron, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And I want to welcome Rabbi Barry Marcus. Rabbi Marcus is the rabbi of Central Synagogue in West London. And Rabbi Marcus had the privilege of working with both Rabbi Tanzer, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, as well as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, two great luminaries, two great leaders, Gedolim of our generation and of our communities, who have passed away in very recently. And this is very special that we're coming together and that we're bringing together Jews here from Israel, from South Africa, from Cape Town, Johannesburg, Plet. I heard a Kruger there. Hello, Morris Kruger. We have your son Ari, part of our community. It's great to see you. We're waiting for you to come. And so this is very special to connect with old friends and to reminisce and share some of the Torah of these two great luminaries. So let's get the show on the road. And I'm just going to just open up a document here. 1 second. Okay, let's get moving. 1 second. Okay. Good. Okay, so Rabbi Marcus, let's great to have you here. Can you please tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up working both with Rabbi Tanzer and with Rabbi Sachs? I'm going to unmute you 1 second. Ask me.
Okay.
Yes, we could hear you.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, thank our host, Potchim Bichvelo Shel Achsania. I'd like to thank our distinguished host, Rabbi Itan, and also Rabbi Doron Klein, who's been instrumental in organizing this evening as a tribute to these two great men whom I had the privilege of knowing. Just a little correction. I've just retired from the Central Synagogue in Central London after a quarter of a century. So I'm now a man of leisure. It is really an absolute honor and a privilege. I'm very touched to talk about two people whom I knew well for so many years. And as a family living and growing up in Cape Town, where my Zayda was the first Musmach in Africa, probably. He came from Slonim, where he was a rabbi in 1929. And they wouldn't let him go back when he wanted to go back to Slonim. Came the rabbi of the Woodstock Shul, which he served from 1929 until 1944. And then later, my father, Zichron Levacha, came out from the Mir, where his family had already preceded him. And he was a rabbi for over half a century in Cape Town in the Friedrich Shul. So coming from a long background of rabbis, and my older brother Shlomo is a rabbi in Ra'anana, also retired. We had the privilege as children, as Bein Azmanim, July time, Elul time, of having the most unbelievably wonderful visitors, particularly Harav Yosef Kahneman. The Ponevezher Rov was a regular visitor to our home because he was my Zayda's Chavrusa. He studied with my Zayda. And very often, the Mira Rosh Hashiva, first Reb Chaim Finkel Zatzal, and then later Reb Benish, also used to come to Cape Town to collect funds for the yeshivot. So there were times when we had in our small little flat these two great Gedolei Israel, these two real great leaders of Israel. So I know, and I've learned from a young age, to recognize and to be appreciative of having the opportunity to be and to see some really wonderful, great people. And having said this as a preamble, I feel so honored that I can speak about two great rabbis whom I had the privilege of knowing. I came back from Israel in 1975 to Johannesburg, where the late Chief Rabbi Bernard Casper asked me to be his assistant rabbi. And that's when I met Rabbi Avraham Tanzer, Zichrono Livracha. We got friendly. We met at Rabbinical Association meetings, and he asked me to join the staff of Yeshiva College. So I taught there for quite a few years, for about 11 years, and got to know the man extremely well. You know, the COVID that we are all experiencing now has exposed how fragile life is and how material, salient, and necessary clarity and leadership is. And both these gentlemen were the most wonderful examples of genuine Jewish Torah leadership. I know we all miss the human interaction, the oxygen that strengthens our relationships with each other. But we all know that both these two wonderful personalities put chinuch, put education at the forefront of their lives, because it is the foundation of Jewish life and Jewish experience. You know, there are different kinds of pleasure. There's visual pleasure. You see a fine painting, you witness a sunset. There are gastronomic pleasures when one has tasty food. They're all good and all wonderful, but all somewhat ephemeral. But a profound thought has the ability to uplift, to touch the inner recesses of our very own being, of our neshamot. And those thoughts linger for long, and we can always revisit them. Both Rabbi Tanzer and Rabbi Lord Sachs were masters of the word that uplifted thousands and thousands of people. Working with Rabbi Tanzer, we became very friendly because he had a wonderful way about himself. He spoke to all and sundry. He treated every single person with respect. He was modest in his ways, but he was a builder, a real builder. And what he did in South Africa, specifically in Johannesburg, coming there in 1963, originally just for 2 years and stayed for over 50 years. Glen Hazel was a midbar. It was a desert until he got to work creating a genuine Jewish school, Yeshiva College. And what he built, for anyone who's been there and visited, Glen Hazel is a city. It's Ir Va'im Israel. It is an incredibly active place with so many different activities. And he welcomed all the many other organizations that came in afterwards, but many under his influence. He brought Rabbi Goldfan to come and start the Yeshiva Gdolah. So his zchut in creating institutions of genuine education is immeasurable. The thousands of students who passed through, not to mention his synagogue, which was Glen Hazel, of course, where he spoke and where he taught also. He was a man of incredible energy, but a very bright and very astute, had a twinkle in his eye, had a wonderful sense of humor, never saw him ever get angry. He was warm, he was loving and supported by Marsha and his family. And what stands in Glen Hazel today is a testament to, as we say in the Mishnah, Al Tikra Banaich Ela Bonaich, don't call them your sons, but your builders. There was a man who really built up, and we owe him so much in terms of creating a genuine Jewish presence. You know, the irony is that many, many years ago, the Jewish center was Cape Town, because that's where the harbors were, and that's where most European Litvish Yidden came into the country. And when people started going up north, you know, for the gold and the diamonds, anything Jewish was looked upon with suspicion from Cape Town, and they didn't trust anything that was done in Johannesburg. And how times have changed, where now Johannesburg is undisputably the Jewish center in the finest way, and they look on Cape Town with a little bit of suspicion.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Marcus. I'd like to ask you if you could point to 3 major differences and then 3 major similarities between Tanzer and Rabbi Sachs. And from your knowledge that you have with working with both of them, I'd like you to dwell on those points, the differences, similarities.
Okay. So first of all, they were both very modest people. They were almost self-effacing. And the difference is, I think Rabbi Tanzer was a builder. Rabbi Sachs was a writer, a thinker, a publisher, a spokesman, and an ambassador, not only for Jews in the United Kingdom, but far beyond. Rabbi Tanzer was a nurturer. Rabbi Sachs was at his best when he was either writing, or when he appeared on television, or when he spoke in the House of Lords. He was a master of the spoken word. Listening to him, to his wonderful style, you could not help but be moved. And he was our most gifted ambassador for Jews worldwide. There's not been anyone who has reached the places that he reached. How many rabbis can say they addressed the United Nations, or addressed the House of Lords, and so on and so forth? So he managed to get to places, to create and touch a much wider audience. And this is what gave us pride, because he was a man of incredible intellect, who was able to never ever preach. And this is where both he and Rabbi Tanzer had incredible strengths. They never preached. They were both eloquent. They were both very polished, but none of them preached. What they did, and this is, I think, why both these wonderful gentlemen, these wonderful and articulate gentlemen, why they were so beloved and why they are missed, is because they never preached to anyone. What they did was they challenged you, they uplifted you, and they educated you. And that gave everyone such a feeling of warmth. And that is why I think that this great strengths were appreciated absolutely worldwide.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rabbi Marcus. And we're going to move on to like some specific topics here. And what we'd really love to continue to hear about, is some of the behind the scenes, some of the stories, some of the memories, some of the off the cuff sort of moments of being in the presence of greatness. And so let's talk about Israel for a second. Okay. And I'm going to throw out, we have just sort of 3 questions that Rabbi Doron and I that we thought about addressing, and pick what you think might be most interesting to focus on. Number 1, did Rabbi Tanzer and Rabbi Sachs, did they ever consider making Aliyah themselves? Was that on the list? Was that on the plan?
Okay.
So let's start with that question.
Okay. So I can say that it certainly was on the agenda. You have to understand that Rabbi Tanzer took over a small little institution of maybe 30, 40 Bochrim, who were part of Bnei Akiva. And we also owe Bnei Akiva in South Africa a tremendous debt for creating the possibility, of families like the Liebgots and Bronners, and with Rabbi Michael Kosowski, who set up the Yeshiva College. So he took this to a different level. But of course, part of B'nai Akiva Mizrahi is Yeshivat Haaretz, is to make Aliyah to live in Israel. But I believe that Rabbi Tanzer struggled a little bit with his presence in South Africa, but because he was doing such an amazing job of creating nefashot, as we say about Avram and nefashot, the nefesh asher asa b'charan. We talk about our forefather Abraham, not only that Abraham, but this Abraham Tanzer, who saw it as a life and an encompassing duty to make Yiddish neshamas, to make people return to their roots. And I think that's how he dealt with the issue of Israel. As far as Rabbi Lord Sachs goes, I can tell you now from some personal anecdotes. About 3 years ago, he was given an honorary doctorate at Tel Aviv University. Not exactly the seat of Yiddishkeit by a long shot, but nevertheless, even they recognized his contribution. And I was invited to go along, and we spent Shabbat together. I was asked to speak. And on Shabbat afternoon, I went for a walk with him on the Tel Aviv sort of beachfront on the front of the hotels, and we started to, well, he actually, with his wife, with Elaine, started asking me, and he said to me, turned around and said, what do you think I should do? Should I make Aliyah? Should I come to Israel? And his heart was certainly in Israel, and there were certainly plans for him to spend more and more time in Israel. And he was, I think, conflicted, very conflicted, because he really wanted to. And I tried to encourage him, because if there's anywhere in the world that could benefit from his unique way of reaching even those people on the periphery, and he was always complimentary about even the most secular Israelis. And he was the one who used to say we need to love them equally and not to judge them. So certainly it was something he wanted to do, and something which unfortunately was prevented from doing. I just also want to tell you, on that same weekend at Tel Aviv University, where they also gave out doctorates to some very, very successful people from all over the world, every single person who was going to receive a doctorate, they asked Rabbi Sachs to make the acceptance speech. Normally each recipient makes a speech. They all stood back and withdrew, and they asked him to make the speech. He made the most wonderful speech, and at the end, this irreligious university filled with the sort of the who's who in Israel all stood up and clapped this man for 3-4 minutes. Such was his ability to go beyond some of the borders that we impose sometimes on ourselves, some of the restrictions, some of the way we look at other people. And in this, he displayed that greatness over and over again, and certainly in the United Kingdom. My non-Jewish friends used to complain if he didn't appear on BBC Radio Thought for the Day, which he did very often. People absolutely loved it because they could relate to it.
Interesting. Wow, fascinating. Wow, it's interesting what you point out about Rabbi Sachs with Israel in particular. They ran an article in Makor Rishon, which is a newspaper here in Israel that I enjoy reading. And in Makor Rishon, they interviewed his brother. And I'm remembering now that Rabbi Sachs actually bought an apartment in Yerushalayim. The goal was to definitely spend more time here. But they also had a very interesting point that he actually, as important as he was as a religious figure for diaspora Jewry, in many ways he was less well known in Israel, which is unfortunate, because I believe that his theology and his works can be deeply moving for broader Israeli audience. But one of these things that he struggled in was the fact that he didn't feel that he could speak in Hebrew at the same level that he could speak in English. The play, the words, the language, the rhetoric. I mean, it was just impossible to give speeches at that level, which you've been speaking about, for example. And his brother actually said, you know what, so speak in English. The Israelis will love it. They'll love listening to your British accent. But he didn't feel comfortable doing it. So that was a little bit of what held him back from breaking into the the Israeli scene. So we have, two more, another cluster of questions about Israel. Were Rabbi Tanzer, Rabbi Sachs ever critical of Israel? Obviously supportive and defended Israel in the international forums, but were they ever critical of Israel? And how do they relate to, issues of dealing with the Palestinian issue? I'm curious what they said about it.
I can't recall either Rabbi Tanzer or Rabbi Sachs ever entering the realm of politics. They stewed, certainly Rabbi Sachs, and I met him in 1991 when he asked me to take over his position at his synagogue because he was then elected to be the chief rabbi. And I got to know him well, and I can tell you that he would never certainly openly or even privately criticize Israel because he kept away from politics, from raw politics. He was always supportive of Israel, extremely so.
I don't mean critical in the sense of not supporting Israel generally, but was he ever willing to give constructive feedback about how he thought Israel was functioning, what they should be doing or not be doing? Was that something he was willing to speak about publicly?
See, he would never ever, that would never be a subject, for a topic for a speech. But what he did do was he sat on forums in Israel with Amos Oz, or with the most left-wing and people you wouldn't expect a rabbi to actually sit and have a debate with. And this was his way of trying to bridge the gap. And I think you correctly said that of all the places where a man with this kind of vision was and is needed, it is in Israel, because of the tremendous divide in Israel. And he was able in the UK and beyond to touch people who were not even of our faith. And in Israel, it's an issue of people of our faith. And he had a way, and he started translating his books into Hebrew, and he got a little better known. I mean, I warned him, to be honest, I said to him, don't become a rabbi in Israel, because you don't want to be part of the rabbanut in Israel, because their star isn't always looked upon with love and admiration. But there was certainly a role for him. But he would never ever have a speech or a sermon. He would talk about the ethical side, the moral side, and that's certainly. But politics.
Yeah, but what did the ethical, moral side demand? What do you think? What did they believe that demanded of us as Jews living in Israel?
He always spoke about chesed. He always spoke about kindness to everyone. So, you can infer from that what his thoughts were. But he was not somebody who wanted to be associated with any kind of political slant or political slogan. Okay, he kept very far from that, because he was somebody who didn't like broigas. He didn't like merivot. He didn't like to get involved in conflicts. He shied away very much from that, and he preferred his books and his oratory to send a much more wholesome message
that transcended, perhaps petty politics.
Yeah, he reckoned he had enough of petty politics being a rabbi of a synagogue. And
tell me about it. Okay, we're going to move on to the next topic.
Right, so I'd like to relate to education. Since I was a Talmid of Rabbi Tanzer, I studied at Yeshiva College, and that's where I got my grounding from, both in Zionism and Judaism, together with Bnei Akiva. So, I remember, Rav Berry, if I recall, you'll correct me, but if you got really upset with one of the kids in your class, I remember you throwing the blackboard duster at someone. I don't know. Maybe I remember that, but I wonder how did Rav Tanzer and how did Rav Sachs relate to naughty boys at school, and just kids in general that are being naughty, and also how did they relate to children that were leaving the religion and had chosen a non-religious path? how did they deal? What did they say to families? What were their best practices when dealing with children, with youth, and how to keep them excited and involved in Judaism? I'd like to hear from the two of them.
Well, listen, if I were you, Rav Doron, I wouldn't bring up that incident. I wouldn't tell the whole world that you were a naughty boy and that you deserve to have the duster thrown at you. No, it wasn't you. Look, we all, as teachers, are tested. And yes, I sometimes had a way of dealing with issues which were sometimes dramatic, but they served the purpose, but very, very, very seldom. Look, both Rabbi Tanzer never berated a student, would never shout or scream. He had incredible self-control, and he had a way of disarming even the most difficult of students. He did it with putting his hand around their shoulder with a smile or with a word. He completely disarmed them with his warmth. And as I said, he was never critical. He would never ever, because we know that lo zu haderech, that's the wrong way to go about it. It's the whole story of in one of the yeshivas in Eastern Europe, where a student in yeshiva began behaving rather weirdly, and the other students were quite open about their opposition criticism. And the mashgiach of the yeshiva said, hang on, what are you guys doing here? Just because when you have a watch and it stops, you're not going to have a go at the dials. It means that something in the inner mechanism is not working correctly. And this, I think, was certainly Rabbi Tanzer's approach, of always trying to do it and to encourage. And he did it with such warmth. And that was one of his great skills. He was able to reach and to touch. He had an incredible acumen when it came to reading human beings. And that's a real skill and a blessing. And he used that to encourage even, as I say, the most wayward of all students. Now, Rabbi Sachs wasn't involved as much as Rabbi Tanzer was in sort of hands-on education, at the time when he was the principal of Jews College. But then you're dealing with adults and so on and so forth. But again, he also, they would never preach. There was no fire and brimstone. There was, again, a challenge to you to be the best human being that you could. And that is what I believe, that is why they were both able to touch so many people. There was a genuine love of the next person. And that came through in the way he wrote, in the way he broadcast, and in the way he dealt with people. Rabbi Tanzer was a lot more ebullient, I must say, and a lot more sort of a bit of a chevreman. Rabbi Saxon was a little bit more reserved, but nevertheless, the advice that they would give to families, and I saw that over and over again, was so beautiful because it was always couched in warmth and in encouragement.
Thank you. That was beautiful. It brings back memories. Toda rabba. And I wanted to ask you, did Rav Tanzer and Sachs have a relationship you're aware of?
They obviously knew of each other, but I don't think because of the geographics that they actually had a relationship. And the truth is, the two of them worked in very different areas. Rabbi Tanzer was one of the most focused people I've ever met. To come there in 1963 and to stick it out in a barren desert that Johannesburg was then, and to build what he's built, that demanded total focus in the whole process of education. Rabbi Sachs, on the other hand, started his life as an academic, as opposed to Rabbi Tanzer in the yeshiva world. And so he brought, and this was one of the strengths of Lord Sachs, or Rabbi Sachs, was able to bring from the secular academic world into our lives and to weave some beautiful thoughts that help people relate to their Yiddishkeit, to their Judaism, and it was done in the most beautiful and eloquent way.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you. Beautiful, beautiful and touching to hear these stories. Next question, Rabbi Marcus.
Yeah.
Both of them were also pulpit rabbis, right?
Yes.
Rabbi Tanzer was a principal as well as a pulpit rabbi. Rabbi Sachs was a thinker and a writer, but also a pulpit rabbi for a number of years.
Yes.
What were like the key messages that they kept, touching upon from the pulpit, that they kept, that they wanted their congregants to know as communal rabbanim?
Well, as far as Rabbi Sachs goes, I must point out that he was never, in the latter years, a full-time rabbi. He kind of tried to stay away from being a full-time communal pulpit rabbi.
Sounds like great advice. That sounds like great advice.
In the accepted, kind of role, and he always retained, even when he was in Marble Arch, just before he became chief rabbi, he was the principal of Jews College. So he tried to compartmentalize, and he on Shabbat and Chagim, he was in the community where he made the most wonderful drashot, parashat Shavua, and thoughts. And then during the week, he was involved in educating potential Jewish teachers and rabbanim. And as I said earlier, his strength was the ability to explain even the most difficult things in Torah, or the things that we face as Jews, with such clarity and also with brevity. And he had an incredible mastery of the English language and had his own style. But he would never, but it was always underpinned by, I think, where he probably asked himself, what do I want my congregation to go away with the Shabbat?
Yeah, but what were so how did they each address the issue of communal tefillah, communal prayer? We know in our communities that we really struggle. Every community struggles to inspire people to daven properly and to engage and not to be bored. And how did they address that in their own communities as pulpit rabbanim?
Well, what he did was he translated and put out a new Siddur, and he did the same monumental thing with the Machzorim for Rosh Hashanah and for Yom Kippur. I mean, his output of some 38 books is just amazing. But at the very beginning, he concentrated on Siddur and on the Machzorim, because he understood that the Siddurim that people were asked to use in the United Kingdom and beyond, or in the Commonwealth, were very often a closed book to the average person coming into synagogue, on the odd occasion. And so the translation became an incredibly positive tool for a lot of people who suddenly were able now to engage with tefillah. His essays at the beginning of the Siddurim and also at the beginning of the Machzorim are just wonderfully, they are inspiring, and they give you a taste of wanting to actually immerse a little more. So that's where he put a lot of his energy in.
Okay, Rav Deron, over to you.
Rav Barry, we were both in South Africa during the apartheid era, and we both know the challenges that gave to communal leaders. And I'd like to hear how both Rabbi Tanzer and Rabbi Sachs, how did they engage with those issues, with national politics, with the broader South African and on the British society, and dealing with challenges that came from the societies that we lived in at the time?
I'm not sure to give you an exact example, but my impression is that Rabbi Tanzer would always speak a little bit about treating all human beings in the same way and with kindness. And I think that was his way of dealing with the apartheid situation in South Africa. He certainly never got politically involved, and I think he was more concerned with making sure that, I once heard him, say that we should not treat the domestic help in a sort of dismissive way. And we need also to recognize that they're human beings and that our Judaism demands of us to treat them fairly. So, I mean, those kind of things I heard from him, and I know that was very much part of who he was. As to Rabbi Sachs and politics, the only time that I have heard him enter into that field was, and you can actually get this on YouTube, he made the most powerful 7-minute speech in the House of Lords, and without mentioning the name of certain politicians who were accused of blatant anti-Semitism, but he made this most impassioned 7-minute speech about anti-Semitism and the lack of tolerance. And I think people certainly understood what he was saying. So he was not afraid to stand up, and especially when it was issues of anti-Semitism and also issues regarding Israel.
Okay, thank you. So next set of questions, we want to understand what some of the leadership challenges that they faced. What do you think were the toughest decisions that Rabbi Sachs and Rabbi Tanzer had to address? Toughest decisions, controversies that they had to deal with?
Yes, well, look, any common leader will face challenges. Rabbi Tanzer faced a lot of issues because he was somebody who didn't begrudge other people coming in on his patch. And as I've said a few times this evening, when he came was the desert, and if you look at it today, there's a proliferation of various organizations in the Glen Hazel area. And they owe it to him, to his width, his breadth, and his tolerance. But not all of the other people wanting to get in on the action in Glen Hazel were as kind to him as he was to them. So I know that, there were areas of disappointment where some people tried to undermine, and it was not pleasant. But he dealt with this stoically. He was a tough man. Behind all of that, he was no pushover, and he knew how to navigate. And the net result is you have a very active suburb in Johannesburg with so many different kinds of organizations, which in a sense are all due to his understanding and tolerance. As to Rabbi Sachs, he faced, like his predecessor, issues of anti-Semitism, issues of anti-Israel, demonstrations in the streets of London. And he, as I said, used the radio and television to speak about this and to highlight how incompatible it was with, British life and British values. I mean, he did it in a very smart way, being the intelligent man that he was. But then he also faced a lot of challenges from within the Jewish community. There were parts of the community that were openly hostile to him. There were those who challenged one of his books. So he had a lot of issues to deal with, and he was a man who was averse to arguments, and he really was somebody who wanted to keep away from conflict, but he was very often dragged into it. And I mean, it's no secret that, he told me the day he retired, or he stood down as chief rabbi, he told me it was one of the happiest days for him and his wife Elaine. He said to me, he says, now I can go get on a bus and I can just go, or I can go watch a movie. So, there were issues which all rabbis face, but he in particular did have some very unpleasant moments in his rabbinate. And he dealt with it always with dignity, with great personal dignity.
Okay, next, we're going to move on to the next and final topic this evening, before we open it up to the participants here to throw out some questions. And just so you can get ready, the questions that you could write in, we'll write them in on the chat. Okay, that's the best way to organize this. But we want to get a sense of what they were like is on a personal level.
So if I can just interrupt you and just tell you one little anecdote. In 1991, when he was then elected to be the chief rabbi, Rabbi Sachs, he served on a number of high-profile committees and organizations. One of them was the Central Religious Advisory Council, which was strangely known by the name CRAC, the Rashi Tevot. And this board used to advise and watch out for anti-Semitism on the BBC and ITV. So he stood down and he asked me to take his seat on this august committee. After a week or two, I heard the same request and comment from those around the table. Around the table were the leaders of all the other religious faith groups in England. So the Catholics had one, the Church of England, the Buddhists, the Muslims, so on. Each one of them, without fail, would come up to me after the meeting at some stage, and the same thing was said over and over again. I wish we had a spokesman like you have in Rabbi Sachs. Even they recognized this man's unbelievable oratory, his intelligence, his intellect, and the ability to make a contribution beyond just your own community and your own faith.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next question. Being a communal leader comes with a lot of stresses and challenges. And I'm curious, behind the scenes, how do they deal with the stress? What type of outlets did they have? Did they create for themselves to be able to live with such demanding schedules? Maybe have some.
Both of them had the most wonderful support from their wives, Marcia and Elaine, and I think Rabbi Tanzer certainly used this family. I won't say it's a refuge, but that's where I think he rejuvenated himself and recharged himself. Rabbi Sachs would disappear when he was the chief rabbi every single Thursday. You could never get hold of him. Doesn't matter who you were.
Well, was he on whiskey tours in Scotland? Where would he go?
He had a little shed at the bottom of his garden where he would disappear, no telephone, and that was his downtime, but that was also his productive time, and that's when he wrote. He went there and he wrote, and he spent the entire day completely away from everything, no technology, just busy writing, putting his thoughts down together. And we see the result. I mean, some 38 books plus all the many other publications. And he's, just the output is just simply amazing in today's time. One man to put out that much, but not just the quantity, the quality and the ability to deal, with issues that affect our lives.
And what would they do, both of them are obviously very busy. What strategies, techniques did they have to maximize their days? What were their tricks to make a 24-hour day into a 30-hour day?
So Rabbi Sachs certainly, I don't know much about Rabbi Tanzer and recreation because I don't recall him joining me on the sports field at Yeshiva College, although there is one thing I have to mention. Rabbi Klein reminded me. When I was a rabbi at Waverley, I encountered a Perez family who had a son called Lawrence, who was one of the most brilliant students I ever had the privilege of trying to teach. And I battled but succeeded in persuading the family.
Yeah, what a shame he didn't play soccer or football instead, right?
I know. Well, we managed to get him. Today's Rabbi Doron Perez, the CEO of Mizrahi. He was a student of mine, and I managed to.
You can't win them all. You can't win them all.
I know, but I went to send him to Yeshiva College, and Rabbi Tanzer was always mindful to thank me and others in public. This was one of his real wonderful qualities. But to get back to downtime. Rabbi Sachs liked to walk whenever he had free time, and he was a very, very quick walker. He was able to cover. He didn't sort of hang around. He covered quite distances, and also when he had annual leave, he would go to some far-flung place, and he would go on these hiking walks and tours, and that's how he sort of that was his downtime, and that's how he remained slim also.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi Marcus, you mentioned Marcia, and we at Yeshiva
Yes.
College, we all remember her part that she played also in the girls' school at Yeshiva College. I'm interested to hear about the parts that the Rebbitzins played, both the public part, the private part, in their husbands' lives, and how they had the impact also on their community, and also the children. Interesting to hear about the family dynamic. And also, if you can share any, funny stories and any humorous anecdotes that you remember about the two of them.
Well, look, I suppose the biggest compliment I can pay to Rabbi Tanzer and to Marcia is that my younger sister was a teacher at Yeshiva College for 40 years. I used to call her Mora Ruth. And if you want anecdotes, you really speak to her, because she was very close with Rabbi Tanzer and also with Marcia over the years. But they were a very tight unit. They were a tight unit. There was incredible support. Marcia also underplayed. I mean, she's a smart lady, and also made a contribution in the girls' school over the years. Look, like any family, they had their ups and downs, and keeping kids in line and things like that. But it was always done in the nicest possible way, with a genteel kind of hand. But I really, at the moment, I mean, I've been away from South Africa for so long, I'd find it hard to try and remember any kind of anecdotes. But also Rabbi Sachs was incredibly well supported by Elaine and by his children, especially the one daughter now who has taken on almost an educational role in her own right.
And do you have any funny stories that you'd want to share with us about the two of them?
Probably no. I would feel a bit uncomfortable about breaking some kind of confidences here.
Yeah, I understand.
I'll just share one anecdote from Rabbi Sachs. When I was when he came to Lincoln Square Synagogue, when I was serving as the assistant rabbi, he came for Shabbat. It was an amazing Shabbat to hear him speak. And Lincoln Square at the time had built a new building, and the old building was right next to the old one. And he got up from the pulpit and he said, there's this idea that there's one Jew and two synagogues. He says, you have really fulfilled this here at Lincoln Square Synagogue in Manhattan. So he definitely had a good sense of humor.
Oh, yes.
So
there is one anecdote which I can share. Rabbi Sachs liked football and was an Arsenal supporter. And at the time he was chief rabbi, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey, was also an Arsenal supporter. So the two of them went together to watch a match and sat together, and both being Arsenal supporters, and were rather disappointed. They played Manchester United, and I think they lost 5-2. And then there was a comment that says, well, if the Archbishop and the Chief Rabbi sitting at Highbury watching, supporting Arsenal, and they lose so badly, I think it was 5-2 or 6-2. This is proof that there's no God. Rabbi Sachs was so quick off the mark and said, no, he says, that doesn't prove that there's no God. All it does, it proves that God is a Manchester United supporter.
Okay. So we're going to open it now to the if anybody would like to ask any questions, you could post them on the chat. Just write in, and this is an opportunity to share some thoughts or some questions if you have for Rabbi Marcus, or for Rabbi Rav Doron as well, who knew Rabbi Tanzer personally. So you can write in those questions right now. Take a minute to do it. But I will just mention, first of all, it's thank you everybody for participating in this event tonight. I really feel that this brought together Jews from around the world to celebrate and commemorate these two great Gedolim, these two great leaders who passed away the last few months and did not receive the dignified kibbutim that they should have received, being that we're living in COVID times. I do want to mention though, and I'm sure I'm speaking here for Abderone as well, if anybody who's not yet living in Israel would like to give it a shot, well, you have Abderone here with Telfed, and also I'm here with Shiftay, and if you need any help, have any questions, we would be more than happy to help. If you have any questions about Ra'anana, about Israel, about Beit Shemesh, whatever it is. So I see we have a question here from Rob Katz. And he says, Rabbi Marcus, were you influenced by Rabbi Tanzer directly in your role as a leading rabbi over the years?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question. I mean, I was a young rabbi when I came to Johannesburg, and I was the assistant to the late Rabbi Casper, and then started teaching at Shiva College. Of course, well, I was very much influenced by his derech, his whole way of look, it was a big school and there were a few hundred. His ability to navigate both the shul, the community, and the school, and to run it so efficiently. And the one thing, you can judge how effective he was, because the school was a place where there was warmth. It was tangible, and you could see that because people walked around with smiles. People were happy to be in that environment, led so beautifully by Rabbi Tanzer.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, final chance. Okay, we're going to bring this evening to a close. Thank you everybody for participating. Thank you, Rabbi Barry Marcus. Kol hakavod, mechiat kapayim. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and insight and experience with us. Thank you, Rav Doron, for helping to organize this evening. Thank you to Telfed. And from Kilat Shiftei Yisrael, we wish all of you, first of all, everyone should have much hatzlacha moving forward. And I want to bless everybody with briut and nachat. Please come visit. And Bezrat Hashem, we're all going to be able to be together here in Eretz Yisrael, celebrating together the end of the COVID era. So Erev Tov l'kulam. And any parting words?
Yes, I really want to thank Rabbi Marcus so much. I was a member of Rabbi Marcus's congregation in Waverley. It was in 1979. And it's just so special for me to be together with Rabbi Marcus on such a panel, and to hear his words of wisdom and to reminisce together about school days and Rabbi Tanzer, and to learn about Rabbi Sachs. And I really want to thank Rabbi Marcus for his time and putting so much thought into this evening. So Toda Rabba, Rabbi, and it's great to be in touch again after all these years. And I also want to invite everybody. We have Telfed has a number of virtual events every month. Our next one is on Sunday. That's with another ex-South African. That's Professor Manfred Green, who's the professor of medicine at Haifa University. And next Sunday at 8, he's going to be discussing the COVID vaccine, what that means for us in the long term, and what it means for Corona in the long term. So it'll be a very interesting discussion. So you're welcome to join us. Details on the Telfed website. And it's just fantastic for us at Telfed to partner together with Shiftay. It's a natural partnership here, right, to certainly on topics like these. And it's great to be here this evening. And as Rabbi Ben David said, anybody with any Aliyah questions, Klita questions, so all the South Africans and Australians, we are your address in Israel. So please be in touch with us via our Facebook page and via our website. And thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, Erev Tov, thank you. I'll leave the Zoom open if anybody wants to chat with some old friends. And so Erev Tov l'kulam.
כבוד לכם.
Okay.
Norman who?
I just want to
See
say
the
thank you.
name.
There were a number of the Tanzer family that I see were with us. I see that they joined us, and that's also very special. So I want to thank them for joining us this evening. I can see now in the list of participants that we had a few members from the Tanzer family with us, and people from Yeshiva College. So Toda Rabbi.
Rabbi Marcus, Freda, Freda Abrams, you knew me as Fran in the old days.
Hi,
Hi, nice to see you after all these years.
thank you. Likewise,
Thank you.
hope you're well.
Baruch Hashem. Living in Israel, best place to be.
You're absolutely right there.
Baruch Hashem. Thank you. Good night, everybody. I'm going to log off.
Just want to say that Rav Tanzer Zatzal used to commence every drasha with a good joke, many of which I am still telling today.
I'll call you back now. Ruth. Yeah.
True. I want to wish everybody good health and Briut Eitana. For those that are still have to come to Eretz Yisrael, we look forward to greeting you here. I'm going to sign off, and I wish everybody a Laila Tov and Kol HaKavod to Rabbi Mark.
All according to the organizers, it was an excellent evening.
Bye, Doron. Bye.
I want to wish everybody good health.
Hi, Doron. Thank you very much for organizing. Great.
Thanks, Freda.
Toda Rabba.
I'm going to sign off, and I wish everybody a Laila Tov and Kol HaKavod to Rabbi Mark.
Here's Mrs. Tanzer. Mrs. Tanzer.
Yes, I saw Marcy was here, and I saw Baruch was here, and I saw some Malka Benda.
Give her a Tanzer. Mrs. Tanzer.
The Laila Tov, everyone. It was great to
Hi,
see you.
everyone.